Good morning and welcome to History Watch. Today we travel to Colonial Williamsburg, one of the premier locations for learning the history of our nation's founding. Colonial Williamsburg is known for its 300-acre campus full of thousands of 18th century living history exhibits, world-class museums, and interpreters of iconic historical characters and tradespeople dressed in period-correct attire. But few people know about the army of public historians working behind the scenes to ensure that what the public experiences is as historically accurate as possible, or about the Teachers Institute working to develop educators from around the world. Today, our spotlight is on Colonial Williamsburg's Teacher Institute Program Manager, Isabel Mann. Isabel was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in history from the University of Georgia. After graduation, Isabel taught social studies to middle and high school students in South Carolina. She worked as a museum educator and data specialist for the Museum of History and Holocaust Education at Kennesaw State University, designing and implementing history programs for teachers and students around the Southeast. She then developed and implemented teacher professional development programs for the National World War II Museum, managing the museum's week-long Summer Teacher Seminars program for over 2 years. Most recently, Isabel began a new position as one of Colonial Williamsburg's Teacher Institute program managers, leading both in-person and online professional development programs for K-12 teachers from around the world. We caught up with Isabel during her second round of professional development sessions in the summer of 2024, and she was kind enough to sit down with us to talk about her journey in becoming an educator and public historian. So, thank you, Isabel, for joining us today. And if you would, could you tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest in history?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and my dad is a huge history buff. So my family, we did a trip up to Virginia for my sister to audition for the University of Virginia's music program when she was looking at colleges. And so my dad and I came to Colonial Williamsburg. And I just loved it. So I really had this, even as a kid, this love for history, and it was just a way for my dad and I to spend a lot of time together. And then in high school, I had an amazing AP US history teacher who kind of opened up for me that there's a lot of stuff that you can do with history. It's not just, becoming a lawyer if you major in history or becoming a teacher. There's a lot of different museums that you could work at. She did a lot of these kinds of summer teacher programs through Gilder Lehrman, and so she talked a lot about the different public historians that she worked with through those programs. When I first started college, the dream was to be a college professor. I was particularly interested in the Civil War, so I actually signed up for a double degree program. I got my BA and MA in history at the same time from UGA. And while I was starting my master's and graduate courses, I realized that getting my PhD was not for me. I didn't want to do another 5 or 7 years of that kind of schooling. And so I was able to spend a summer in DC interning for 2 different historic homes. I kind of realized that being in a basement in a library and doing archival work was not for me. All this random posting at a museum through a public university, and that's the job that I ended up getting. So I had this wonderful experience working with a team of 5 educators. My manager, who I consider a mentor, had spent about 10 years teaching middle school. And she was wonderful. So we did a lot of field trips on site at the museum, but my favorite part of that job was traveling. So I got to go to almost every school district in Metro Atlanta. I did a lot of school districts in and around Athens and in North Georgia. And so I would go in and do a teacher's full set of lessons for the day. So I worked with a lot of 5th grade students, a lot of middle school students, and then high school students as well. And that was a truly wonderful experience. I feel like I came from teaching in the classroom really having struggled to being in an environment where I got to see the resources and power that museums have, or the opportunity that museums have to support students and teachers and provide really unique learning experiences for students and teachers. And I had this fabulous mentor. I didn't have a mentor teacher when I was in the classroom, so she really helped refine what I thought about education and what it means to be an educator. I ended up getting a job at the World War II Museum in New Orleans as their teacher programs manager. So I had done some professional development with teachers during the school year, a lot of in-service days, specifically about best practices for teaching the Holocaust, but I had never done these sort of week-long programs before. I mean, I was really just kind of thrown into it. The education team and my manager at the time didn't have a clear idea or vision of what those programs could look like after the pandemic. They really gave me free rein to kind of figure out what they could look like, what teachers needed, and sort of this post-pandemic teaching environment. And that was kind of trial by fire. My first ended up being a really fabulous experience, even though it was kind of daunting. And so that's when I kind of fell in love with how museums can support teachers. Being in a position where I had this national museum with all the funding, all of the resources, the historians, the curators, and being able to design such a powerful learning experience for teachers with those resources, I kind of fell in love with that work and working with teachers in that way. And so when this opportunity popped up, I really wanted it. I wanted to go to an institution that has been a leader in teacher programming since the 90s, and is doing the work that I was doing as a one-person team at the World War II Museum, but on a much bigger scale. And so that's kind of where I'm at in my public historian journey. Is I've spent a lot of time working with students, and now I'm spending a lot of time working with teachers and kind of figuring out what role does museums have in shaping teachers and supporting teachers, and maybe filling in the gaps of the resources and development they're not getting from their schools and their districts.
And you've been in this position for how long?
Colonial, Williamsburg, I started May 20th.
Okay. So,
Only
all right.
a few weeks, about a month.
After this group, where do you think this program can go?
It's a great question. I think it's sort of an exciting time to be joining this team. So they just restructured and brought in new leadership specifically for the Teacher Institute, recognizing that in order to continue being a leader in teacher programming and museums, that you need to be kept on their toes and they need to have new eyes on this program to revamp it and figure out what exactly do teachers need in the lead up to the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So when this summer is over, both people who have been here for 20, 30 years, like Tab and Andy, and the new people like myself are going to come together and collaborate on what changes can we make to this program. I think there's so many great things about this program, but I think that there are some tweaks and new directions that we can go into. I think for me, something that I started doing at the World War II Museum that I would love to bring here is this idea of teaching media literacy through history, right? Analyzing newspapers and primary sources. It's not that different from the skill set that students need to be able to make sense of the information they're being thrown every day through social media. And I think coming on to 2026, that idea of making sense of the information that we have available, even though it's in a different format, we have so much more of it than they did in the 18th century. There's a lot of overlapping skills there, and using history and primary source analysis to help students build media literacy skills for the information landscape today makes that history even more relevant to them, in a way that's not the teacher or educators like myself putting our own political biases on the table, but really is just that skill-based. You're seeing information, some of which is propaganda, some of which is not true, some of which is true, every day. How does this work? How do the algorithms work? How can you take the skills that you're getting from making sense of an 18th century newspaper and use those skills to make sense of social media that you're looking at every day? I think I read something, NPR said this morning, that studies have found that students are on their phone collectively for about 45 minutes every school day. that's a class period for a lot of schools.
Mhm.
They need the skills to be able to make sense of that. And so
Mhm.
that's something that I would like to start here, is maybe having a week or even just a few sessions moving forward about what that could look like. Because we're looking at a lot of primary sources, but how do teachers make those connections to transferring those skills to what they're looking at today, I think would be really cool. So that's sort of my idea. I think there's a lot of small tweaks that can be made in terms of logistics, having come from a different museum, figuring out better ways to do the buses, better ways to do the pacing and the scheduling, is another thing that I think we'll be looking at as well. But in terms of content, looking at, you know, trending pedagogical, buzzwords right now, I think media literacy would be a cool thing that we could dive into as well. Because we have so many primary sources, but those primary sources are not going to be engaging or relevant to students if they can't see how it transfers to their day-to-day lives.
Mhm. Okay. And do you have any words of recommendation or encouragement for people who would like to get into the being a public historian?
Well, I think if you have teaching experience, classroom teaching experience, or if you're interested in and also teaching in the classroom as well as museum education, go and get that teaching experience. I work so much with students, I work so much with teachers, and I would not be half the museum educator I am if I did not have experience in the classroom. And I think increasingly, having been a part of interview processes at multiple different institutions now for museum educator positions, the first thing a lot of hiring managers are looking for is if they have teaching experience in the classroom. And so I think if you have any sort of desire or interest, I would really look into that and consider it, because it will get you a step in the door at a lot of places for museum education. That's increasingly something that they're looking for, because you just can't, you will facilitate a much better field trip if you have that experience, just from a classroom management perspective, right? I also think anyone who's interested in that kind of work, I've worked with a lot of museum educators who love museums and they love history, but they don't love students and they don't love teachers. And I think this job is really hard to do if you don't have a passion for serving teachers and serving students. That's so much of what we do outside of the general public. And so if you're not interested in that, there's so many more opportunities and collections and archives and research at a lot of big institutions like this. But if you want museum education, you have to be coming from a place of passion for students and teachers. Otherwise, it's not going to be fun for you.
We would like to thank Isabel for taking time out of her busy schedule to describe her journey in becoming a public historian at Colonial Williamsburg's Teachers Institute. We can all take comfort knowing that thousands of teachers around the country are taking part in teacher professional development each summer to enhance their skills in teaching, and in knowing that there are hundreds of public historians like Isabel coaching, teaching, and supporting those teachers as they move along their own journey in becoming better historians.